Customer flips out over the word courtesy, loses out on fee waiver. This technically wasn't my petty revenge, but that of a coworker of mine that I was witness to. I worked in a call center for a credit card company. At the time there was a $10 fee for processing a payment over the phone. I'm not here to justify it. That's just what it was, and it was perfectly legal. It was one of those things that a CSR could choose to waive, but were definitely not required to, and in fact would have to justify their reasoning for waiving it. Waive too many and you'll get a lesser raise, worse shift choices, etc. So not a lot of people waived them. Anyway, I was sitting with a girl, listening to her call as part of my job at the time, and she received a call that went like this, verbatim. "I want to make a payment over the phone," the customer said gruffly. "That's no problem," replied the rep. "It does have to be with a check, and there is a $10 processing fee for that." "A fee? I didn't know there was a fee." "Well, I can waive it for you as a courtesy. Since this is your first time paying by phone, just remember you can always pay online or in the store." "A courtesy?" he shrieked, cutting her off. "It isn't a courtesy. You can't consider it a courtesy if there is no other way to pay the dang bill. I'm going to waive it for you, sir," she pleaded, trying to talk him down from his unhinged fury. "It's no problem, but there are other payment methods. As I was saying, you can." "This isn't right," he continued to berate her. "How dare you say it's a courtesy? I want to talk to your supervisor right now." At that point she was required to transfer to a supervisor, getting someone I knew quite well and who had little patience for jerk customers. I didn't hear that call myself, but I talked to the supervisor after. Upon getting the call, the customer screamed at her, the supervisor, for the word courtesy being used, and demanded an apology and to pay his bill. She apologized. She was required to. We all were, regardless of fault or logic when talking to a customer, and offered to take his payment. However, because he was being an ass, she refused to waive the $10 fee, which was her prerogative and totally allowed. The prior rep had made a judgment call to offer to waive the fee. That was that individual's decision, and since he didn't allow her to process the payment, thus he didn't accept her offer, the next person was not bound by that, and the way our phones were set up, it was impossible to transfer it back to the original CSR. It is definitely a fine line she towed, but it was still allowed. He ultimately made the payment with the fee, and that was that. Let that be a lesson. Don't be a D and set your ego aside. Sell behind my sister's back. I will waste your time. This happened a few years ago, but felt like this story belonged here. My sister was pregnant at the time and didn't have much money to get baby stuff brand new. She decided to use an online marketplace for used baby clothes and furniture. She had found a changing table that she liked and messaged the seller about the details. They had agreed to meet at a public place for the transaction on a certain date. The day before the scheduled meet, my sister had already made plans with a friend with a truck. She messaged the seller about the final details, and then the seller revealed that she had sold it to someone else already. My sister told her that was messed up, that she had agreed to sell to her and already made arrangements with a truck. The seller was not apologetic whatsoever and basically had a sorry not sorry attitude. I can see my sister was pretty upset by this lady and decided to inflict some petty revenge on my own. I found the seller's other items for sale and messaged her myself about a meetup to buy one of the other items. We exchanged numbers and she was none the wiser of the connection between me and my sister. I texted her that I was on my way to the meeting point the day of, but really I was sitting on my couch watching Netflix. She texted she was almost there, and few minutes later she told me where she was parked and what her car looked like. I continued texting every few minutes that I was caught in traffic or at traffic lights. 45 minutes later she becomes irate and said she couldn't wait any longer and left. I finished my movie on Netflix with a shit-eating grin of satisfaction. Next time maybe she will think before screwing someone over. Little girl made me miserable, so I framed her with a forged letter and stole her friends. When I was 11 years old I moved to a new school and I was extremely shy. I eventually became best friends with this little girl. I'll call her Amy. Amy and me did everything together and spent a ton of time together. But as time went on she started being very possessive of me and would make me call her the second I got home and always make me ask me mom if I could go over. She would almost scold me and shame me if I didn't contact her. She would play mind games with me and always made me feel bad about myself. She was a compulsive liar and made up all kinds of stories. I ended up crying to my mom that I didn't want to be this girl's friend anymore, but at that point she had alienated me from all the other girls at school. She made sure if I wasn't friends with her I would be all alone. She badmouthed all the other girls in our class to me but always pretended to be their friends. Well, finally over the summer I decided it was enough. I broke off ties with her and went into the next grade anxious, but at least I didn't have someone who constantly made me feel bad about myself. Well, she ended up trying to turn all the girls against me. Even though I insisted I never spoke ill of them, it was all her. I made a risky plan. In our history class there was a strict no passing notes policy. If you were busted, your note would get posted above the chalkboard for everyone to see. I wrote out a note and pretended it was written by her. I bashed a bunch of other girls in it and spilled secrets. I passed it to a clueless guy who sat next to me towards the end of class and made sure the teacher was paying attention. She got up and took it from him. By the next class everyone was talking about the letter Amy wrote, bashing all the other little girls in class. The teacher eventually realized what was in the note and took it down, but the damage was done. The other girls realized I was telling the truth and they all turned on her. I had probably one of the best school years of my life that year. TLDR, little girl was mean after me. I forged a letter talking shit about other people and stole her friends. Snipe my parking spot? Fine. TLDR, snipe a parking space? Okay. The driver don't need to go in. Only my passenger does. Hope you don't have anywhere to be in the immediate future. This happened over a decade ago. I was running errands with my grandmother, and due to her declining health, I was driving. We got to the post office in a strip mall so she could get a book of stamps, and had been patiently waiting for an end spot that was just about to open up. Watched the person get into the car and settle in. I turned on my blinker, signaled my intent and waited patiently. While waiting, I scanned the scenery and watched the other vehicle in question enter the driveway 2 large shops down and heeded no mind to them. Meanwhile, the person finished backing out, but did so in such a way that we were blocked off from accessing it rapidly. But as soon as they cleared the area, I swung a bit wide. I was driving a conversion van to approach the spot when the car I watched enter the driveway acknowledged my blinker, pointed at me, and laughed as they swooped into the spot, nearly tapping the bumper of the vehicle in the spot directly across from him. Important later, I mentioned to this smug entitled jerk that I was obviously waiting for this spot, even had my blinker on, and that he should move. I know, futile, but I figured being nice would be the right approach. I was in my early 20s. I'll only be a minute was his smug response. All right. You want to play games, sir? Games we shall play. I told my grandmother to go ahead and go into the post office to do her business. After confirming that we had nowhere else we needed to go in a timely manner, a plan formulating as I'm ushering her out of the vehicle so I could exact my revenge. 2 things of note. A conversion van is capable of getting insanely close to other objects, and still be able to allow a person to climb in or out, and the vehicle to the right of this jerk was shorter than his, which left extra room for my grandmother to get back in. While my grandmother was in the post office, I rocked the conversion van as close as I possibly could to his bumper without touching anything, while leaving just enough room for my grandmother to get back in through the passenger door. Turns out, his business took longer than hers, so I was able to get even closer to his bumper, ultimately blocking him in, with as close as he was to the car across from him, and as close as I opted to park my vehicle. He had no moves he could make without hitting other vehicles, whereas I was able to move freely to allow the other vehicle to leave, while still keeping jerk pinned in place. What made it better was my grandmother picked up a free calendar from the post office, and we used that as a means to occupy our time and attention. After coming out and seeing what I had done, he started yelling. I don't really remember exactly what was said, but he was fuming. We took this opportunity to smile and wave at him, and my grandmother, catching on to what was happening and with the window cracked, loudly announced that she got a new calendar, and the pictures were breathtaking and that I needed to see them as she pushes the calendar into my field of view and loudly describing what the pictures were of, reading the captions, discussing the various shades of the many colors on each and every picture. When she was done with that, she felt obligated to obnoxiously discuss the days of the month the holidays landed on for that year, the lunar cycles, birthdays, and so on. 25 minutes rolls by at this rate. Who would have thought calendars were so interesting? And Jerk gets out of his car, yelling profanities at such a rate that I swear he was about to pass out. He approached my window and aggressively asked me why I'm taking so long. I responded with, well, had you allowed me the spot I patiently waited for, I wouldn't be blocking you in right now, and drove off. Act like an asshole. Be treated like an asshole. That simple. Fistful of poop. Okay, so this happened when I was a bit younger. My brother was around 8 at the time. I'm pretty sure it's pretty revenge. Our next door neighbors had a boy around 7 who was, to put it mildly, a demon. Anyway, this kid had a nasty habit of grabbing things out of our garden. Had a few holes in the fences at the time. This included toys, garden tools, anything he could get his hands on. The last straw was when he started grabbing at my brother. This one particularly day he had grabbed him and made him face plant the floor. That was it. I grabbed a stick, speared the biggest bit of dog poop I could find and waved it by one of the holes in the fence. Of course he grabbed it. All we heard was him screaming as he ran back to his house. Safe to say he didn't grab anything from our garden ever again. Yes, I'm petty. I have new neighbors. Besides being extremely noisy, I've also noticed random garbage thrown into my backyard. This included box tape, cigarette butts, water bottles and other plastic disposables. Basically stuff that they're too lazy to put into a rubbish bin. Me being petty, every time they threw trash over, I would pick it up and shove it through one of their windows that's within arm's reach from my backyard. The landlord illegally built right up to property line. My brother thinks I should have spoken to them about it. I don't think so. I shouldn't have to tell grown adults not to throw garbage into a neighbor's yard. I think they got the picture. Haven't seen any garbage in my yard for a few days. The sweet stink of revenge. When I was a teenager, I had a straw cowboy hat that I often wore. Some people from school thought it would be funny to swipe it out of my truck and absolutely soak it with that novelty fart spray. This was an expensive hat, a Resistol 5X, and I became livid. I knew exactly who the sprayer was. I witnessed him doing the act. The next Monday, I was ready. My father was an avid outdoorsman and hunter. In our mudroom, he kept most of his hunting gear and clothes, including a bottle of doe and heat scent. This is a very pungent and strong-smelling chemical that is formulated to mimic the smell of a doe, female deer, estrus juices that a buck can smell and zero in on. Hunters use it for obvious reasons, to lure game. So I swiped the 3/4 full bottle. The directions stated to use a dropper of the liquid in normal circumstances. Between classes at school, I spotted my target in the hallway. I walked up behind him, unscrewed the lid, and dumped the remaining liquid on his head, and down the back of his shirt. Immediately people scattered and so did I. It was beautiful. Me being petty the first time in my adult life about my dog, Sue. In my country all dogs have to wear a muzzle at all times in the trains that go between the cities, except the ones in a carrier. I travel every second weekend to my BF3 HOA with my German Shepherd. I always put his muzzle on before getting on the train. However, this day I wanted to do it inside because of my luggage and never seeing anyone ever on this route with a dog. Of course this day, there was another person in the train with a Rottweiler, already sitting, without a muzzle. Both dogs bark in the small wagon hallway, but I hurried to get to my seat and put my dog's muzzle on. I thought for a second to tell the attendant that there was a dog without a muzzle. He'd have to pay a fee, but I was like, well, mine didn't have a muzzle on either in that moment. Nothing happened and I don't have to make the life of anyone else harder than it already is traveling with a big dog. When I went to get out, we passed the same dog, which was now standing in the middle of the hallway, looking like he was about to start a fight with my dog, still not wearing a muzzle. The guy finally pulled him back by the leash, when mine was trying to bark through the muzzle. Then he murmured something about me, which annoyed, but I just said calmly, "You might want to put a muzzle on your dog, because it's mandatory in here." He got nasty saying, well, if I trained my dog right, I wouldn't need one, and that mine is clearly the problem here. Which pissed me off royally and I yelled back that it doesn't matter because the muzzle is mandatory regardless. He was saying something again but I left the train at that point. Walking by the front, I saw an attendant and I told her about the Rottweiler that looked like it was about to start a fight with my dog and wasn't wearing a muzzle despite me telling the owner friendly to put one on. TL. Doctor ratted on a guy because he pissed me off saying my dog isn't trained. I have redone a group project on one evening, because my group mates were really lazy, so I have had people saying it was bad, what I did, and some that were on my side. Maybe I was just a petty a-hole, but maybe some just never were in such a situation, so they have no clue how that feels. You all probably know these people that barely do anything in a group project. I had to do a project, a learning video, with only such people in my group. Because of that, I was trying my best to manage that, and after telling them what we had to do, they picked their parts. Those were already the easiest. It's not even as if it was hard. However, the part we had to do together, I did alone while they were joking around. The parts they were supposed to do alone were not prepared well. Even thought I already sent them anything they needed. All they had to do was reading it and memorize it. They weren't prepared for the recording of the video, and after the dude who was supposed to send me his voice recording of the text he needed to read over WhatsApp as a voice message, I had enough. I read it as reading, redid the recording as we only stopped with the product we had, because there was no time left and none of them would have wanted to spend their afternoon retaking it. The only thing I did to protect them somewhat was telling the teacher that I have lost our work and have redone it alone. She said that it was fine, as she saw what they did over the past lessons we worked together. In the end, I walked out with a good grade and they, well, weren't looking all too happy about their grades. If they hadn't joked around when we had to do our research, maybe I wouldn't have done that. But yeah, some might say I did go too far, but I think one would say different if they had been in my situation. But who knows? Edit. Just short. Want to say thanks for the awards. It's not often that I get any. For you and the ones commenting, stay safe guys. My dog gets revenge on my dad, back before I was born, and shortly after my dad got deployed for the Navy, my mom got a nice little whiner dog mix. Her name was Jewel. My mom spent a long time training that dog while he was overseas, and by the end of it Jewel was well trained and especially potty trained. This is important later. When my dad got back from deployment, he wasn't too happy with sharing a bed with Jewel, so he had her sleep in the kitchen that night. Not only did she bark for most of the night, when my dad got back from work the next day, he found his pillow with covered in dog pee. Safe to say he never complained about sleeping with Jewel again. TLDR, my dad had my dog sleep in the kitchen. She barked all night and peed on his pillow the next day. A young girl being obnoxious, gets mouthful of fart. Once upon a time, in a long Primark queue, a 5-year-old girl was next in the queue with her mother. Pre-covered, so less than a foot away from me. She was literally the worst, throwing a tantrum, making rude comments about her mother for not buying her certain things, being obnoxious to other people in the queue by and generally being loud and intolerable, and the mother wasn't doing a thing about it. I must have listened to her nonsense for at least 15 minutes because the queue was barely moving. Well, it just so happens that her head height was pretty much identical to the height of my ass, and I had some slippery thunder brewing. Yup, you guessed it. That obnoxious girl got a point-blank mouthful of silent fury. Boy, did she make a stink about it. I don't want to toot my own horn, but it was a belter. Hints of creamed spinach and old wet leather. Don't know what I'd been eating, but I'm still proud of how my colon dealt with that situation to this day. I'm pretty sure nobody was gonna call me out. I was a silent, but deadly beast minding his own business. The only thing I regret was how many innocent victims paid the price for my social justice that day, because TBH, the smell was so bad I might as well have shat myself. Thank you for watching. Daily uploads.